The throwing class in Terraria has always kinda well, sucked. But what is the throwing class? I don't know. You know, it's not even in the game. Well, that's because whenever it was in the game, it sucked quite a bit, just a tiny bit. So it was always delegated to having a very, 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 very early game, and eventually it was just encompassed in a ranger. But what if it wasn't this way? What if instead the throwing class was always as developed as the melee or ranger class? What if the throwing class had full progression? The meta of the class would be made up with a few different types of weapons. First, potion guns, which would use the new potions and the old ones in streams, similar to like Golden Shower, or instead you could just go with gauntlets, which are able to throw a wider variety of weapons at the cost of damage, and the fact that potion guns could sometimes proc twice. So essentially they're better for potions specifically, but gauntlets are better general option for the class. Speaking of which, many of these potions would be crafted with an herb, a water bottle, and a specific metal. You know, these metals are very important because for these potions, there's 9 tiers of power, depending on the metals used, which could allow them to slowly grow in power, and basically none of them would truly become fully obsolete. The potion gun is able to shoot potions in streams, you know. It, along with the dirt gauntlet, are found in the surface chests or fishing, you know, if there's something very, very, very seriously wrong with you. But it's actually able to throw dirt, which will ricochet off walls and gain bonus damage, you know what I mean? So maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not. Maybe you'll just search every single fucking surface chest and you'll just never fucking get it, right? Just like every other fucking item in the goddamn surface chest. This game fucking sucks and I fucking hate this. Or you could go in the desert and kill antlions for the antlion jaw, which would instead allow for the throwing of sand, which will also give like a shotgun effect, you know? It's better damaging alternative. Or, of course, if RNGs didn't shine his light onto you, which he rarely is with these surface chests, I swear to God. Holy, the hurting potion would act as the vanilla sort of option. You know, just using day blooms, it just inflicts damage on all enemies. You know, whereas the venom splash would use death weeds to slowly inflict double the damage to enemies. So it's basically less damage now or more damage later, right? Or you could go into the ice biome to get the ice potion. You know, it comes out with large shards rather than, you know, regular splashes. And the bigger these shards would get, the less damage it inflicts, you know, so basically be a trade-off for greater range. The thorn potion would hurt enemies as they move, you know, with spiny vines surrounding them. This effect would be better or worse depending on how much the enemy moves. So for instance, like the constant speed of zombies would be better rather than the slow jittery speeds of slimes, because they would just be, you know? The husk potion could either speed up enemies while making them take more damage or make them slower yet giving them armor. You know, I think it'd be pretty interesting to see this action in multiplayer games, just because, you know, maybe somebody could throw this down. It probably could be used for trolling, because I would imagine that it would stack. So, you know, you could just keep on throwing them at zombies or whatever until they get super unkillable. The ocean potion would explode and shoot out 8 other smaller copies of itself, all of which would have a ton of splash radius. You know, should be noted, somehow the ocean doesn't have its own herb, which is like weird to me. You know what I mean? Like I said, this is why I'm creating new herbs. It's just so every single like biome or whatever gets a new herb. So because that's cool if everyone has like an herb, you know. Same thing with the floating islands and the balls of steel, which would act a bit differently and send out balloons, which would immediately bounce off an object and start heading upwards. They'd also home into enemies, which would make them the primary use, obviously, but it can help with bosses that usually hang above or behind you, like the Eye of All Flesh or Moonlord. Canary potions would make enemies blink rhythmically, dealing a tiny bit of damage, but within this ring, Others will take a lot more until the host dies. Obviously for invasions or moons, this stuff would be pretty fucking crazy. Like, imagine a whole horde of enemies and you throw this thing down, and now they're just continuously hitting each other more and more and more. So the Infern would shoot out rings of fire, basically identical to the Rage Potion, but portable. Fire wouldn't do much, but the actual rings would have pretty considerable damage. 3-layer grenade, a combination of dirt, stone, and sand to make pretty much the gambling grenade. After exploding, it could explode but do more damage, or explode with a bunch of sand coming out and cutting enemies, and like it would hurt and stuff. A beehive, which would shoot like a normal potion gun, but would also have a high chance to spawn a bee along with it. This doesn't really sound like much, but the potion guns could technically shoot a ton, so very likely you'd be getting like a good bee defense out on the field, especially when combined with the plasma bee potion. So these would only spawn 1 to 2 plasma bees, which would be much stronger, and this would basically be the equivalent to bee nades, and watch out for those in the future too. If you went with another easier boss, you'd get the slime glove, which would launch some sticky slime along with your projectiles, and of course you could throw slime, which would vastly improve the amount of slime thrown. And also maybe if you throw like a specific type of slime, you can have some more cool effects. Meteorites. They would now spawn small flowers in their landing sites, which are able to be used for aptly named meteorite potions, which would defy the usual potion physics and crash onto the ground, dealing a ton of damage, but also launching a bunch of other rocks in the air, which could light enemies on fire. With these, you could also make the throwing grenades, which would zip through the air towards enemies, and although it would have like the same range as normal grenades, but with a ton more damage. The other explosive, the pustule, would instead create grotesque boils of enemies, inflating and eventually bursting, leaving spores around them that can explode onto other enemies, essentially being spore sack with extra steps. The ninja armor, it would revert back into being a thorn class armor, and just like it is an iteration, it would just give mundane boots. Bone Glove would also regress back into its former self, becoming capable of throwing regular objects with a chance of the same crossbones, but also being able to throw bones. After entering the dungeon, the Ring of the Caster would hopefully fulfill a spot for these enemies to actually drop something, so they can actually be like useful. This changes up the potion gun meta a bit by turning them into water bolts capable of being bounced a couple times off walls, which would actually lose a little bit of stats, but it could heighten some potions and worsen some else. Also, the herb sage would now hang on planter boxes, and of course would fuel the potions, the evil spirit, which it would only deal 20 damage to enemies, but if that was the killing blow to them, they would explode in a gigantic radius, dealing tons and tons of damage, which would scale depending on the max health of the enemies. So for bees or zombies, it wouldn't actually do much, but if you use this shit on bosses or even just stronger enemies, then it could be crazy, crazy good. And also, before you ask, no, it can't be used on critters. So the X and plus grenades would also explode in like X and plus formations, dealing a bunch of damage closer to the middle. Even though it wouldn't be a drastic change, there would also be a bonus to getting it exactly onto enemies. But mobs with multiple segments would also technically get a huge bonus. The other bone-based explosive would be a game changer, the throwing bombs. Exactly what it says on the tin. Better bombs for throwing. They would not break tiles. It would sort of explode on enemies. Pretty much, you couldn't throw these things on the ground and then wait for an enemy. Instead, you need to exactly hit an enemy after you've thrown a bomb. So basically, if it touches the ground, then it won't explode instantly. But there's a little more than just a dungeon. I'm a bit surprised that through all the updates this game has gotten, that there's still no desert boss. Going deep within the dungeon, in one of these locked chests, you'll find a suspicious looking heart. It can't be used normally. Instead, you'll need to go to the underground desert for small fossil shrines. If broken, these could give 5 different special fossils. And once all of them are gained and added to another shrine, they'll form the skeleton of a creature. And in placing the suspicious-looking heart within them will form the Skella Rex, or Skella T-Rex, or Skillet Rex. Okay, I don't I don't know if you have a better name, tell me in the comments. But I think it works well enough. It's like the first phase would start very slowly, with the boss just trekking towards you, only able to stomp on the ground and bring up shrapnel. Though as damage would be done, cracks would form in the fossil, and the pace of the fight would increase drastically, spawning other skeletons, including cursed skulls, dilapidated skeletons, which slowly walk towards you, and eventually ranged form of them. Eventually, the boss could enrage these enemies to increase their stats, also able to jump widely and stun all grounded enemies, and like at the very, very last resort, a charge attack, which could also hurt enemies too. Its speed would get ridiculous, and the fight would be suffocating for a tiny bit until he'd enter his next stage. The full body would collapse, leaving the lone head with the heart inside. Its AI would be similar to the eyes, expert mode floating, just a bit above the player, quickly dashing, but the skull would always return to hovering slightly above. It could also spawn flames very similar to the Hardmode gens or indigo fossils, which zip around, creating, trails of the same flame, tomb crawler skeletons attacking you if you're on the ground, and more formidable skeletons, and also like a strong wind attack that could also affect enemies, basically just pushing you around. This second phase would also slowly speed up because the pace of their fight is already meteoric. They'd probably be pretty annoying, But after killing the boss, you'd receive 25 to 50 bones, other classes items, possessed fossils, we'll get to that, and other regular boss stuff. The items specific to the throwing class would include the airstrike. Okay, now hear me out. What killed the dinosaurs? Well, a meteor. So basically, this would do the same thing. A dinosaur's spirit's rage at being killed by a meteor to rain down like ghostly shrapnel on other enemies. The sharp rib, which would basically be a throwing knife, still like haunted by the spirits of the bones. So it'd home slightly on the enemies, and it would also have the potential to inflict a weaker purple cursed flame, because obviously this is pre-Hardmode, so it's not going to do like a billion damage. This and the scuffle bones, which would be possessed, this would also have more of like a shaman's curse, pretty much. They'd go like forward looking for enemies in a straight path, then boomerang backwards and forwards until it hits something, only going halfway each time. But the further it travels, the more damage it does. But if it never finds any enemy, a whopping 5 damage is dealt to the player. So just hit these things, because once again, it does not sound like a lot, but imagine throwing like 30 of these things and just being down like a billion health. You know what I mean? You want to hit with these things, because they would deal a bunch of damage, obviously, because you're taking risks. But, of course, before you fight the wall of flesh, you'll need to craft the fossil armor. The set bonus of which would involve the spirits inhabiting the armor, giving you support as you slowly die. So the closer you get to 0 health, the more, health and armor, speed, damage, and stuff you'll gain. It's the mud glove. It's called the mud glove. It just makes sense, okay? An obvious improvement to the dirt glove, this time allowing for the use of mud, which could stick to enemies and deal more damage after ricocheting. Also, they'd be super, super ridiculous. Imagine like the chlorophyte arrows, like that type of bounciness, just absolutely absurdly fucking bouncing everywhere. Though for the first potion gun, you'll have to wait another boss, the slime queen, give you the geode, which could also change the projectiles of the stream, this time coming out in these like long diamond geodes, which could extend very far and enhance some potions, but once again de-hance some others. Speaking of these potions, within the Crimson of Corruption, a new doll's eye would begin forming, which would grow the hemorrhaging potion. It's another direct upgrade to the hurting potion. This wouldn't have the traditional splash damage. Instead, it would have 2 rings, dealing obviously the inner one would do more damage, basically resulting in like a light show. Its sister evil, the Hollow, would also have a rainbow tomato, and as such the rainbow potions would have a spectrum of abilities between a black poisonous crowd, a purple sprinkle of explosive particles, a red pulsing orb of damage, and a yellow ball affected by gravity, which would explode and scatter a bunch of acidic juice everywhere. Or by going into the underground evil and acquiring their resources, you could get the ichor dipped kunai, or cursed inferno balloons, the former of which could pass through enemies and obviously give ichor, but hit enemies would also sort of drip with the ichor, getting other affected enemies too, right? Meanwhile, the cursed water balloon would instantly explode on contact and create a whirlpool of flame where enemies would just get stuck and hurt a bunch by. Shadow balls, basically balls dipped in shadow balls, which could but a quickly disappearing trail behind them and obviously inflicting it onto all of them. And finally, the explosives. I don't know if this would be the most overpowered thing in the game. Throwing dynamite by just combining it with third tier hard mode metals. Of course, it wouldn't break blocks, but it also follow like the same throwing bomb rules. Except, I don't know. I know, obviously, dynamite can be pretty good on the wall of flesh, but I don't know if this is gonna fucking break the balance of the game. Samurai armor, which would basically carry the phantasm attack of sometimes having shadow projectiles come out and hurt enemies further. So, do you know what happens after the Wall of Flesh? Well, the mech bosses, right? Revived versions of previous bosses. So, hallowed bars, suspicious looking heart, mechanical heart, the Tyrannogeist. At this point, man, these spirits are just tired and they just want to die, but their new models won't let them. So, throughout the fight, you'd see like a lot of hints that this would still be a fight. They really want to escape, but they're being forced by all this technology. The rocket-powered head, it would slowly rise out of the pile of bones and roar, awakening the rest of itself. And the boss would cycle between a couple of forms. First, in a large circle around the player, the bones would float together, slowly getting closer. Meanwhile, the few parts would be flying towards the player, trying to catch them out. The skull would circle the outside, shooting lasers and roaring and stuff, which would speed up the bones. Next, the bones would take, the same shape as the dinosaur and ram against the player, running, circles around them while summoning small bones to launch at them and curse skulls and stuff. And finally, the souls would leave the bones into a purple haze of fire, sending it out in every single direction, even rings and projectiles, with the skull flying aimlessly around again, trying to catch the player out, just shooting them from every which direction. But each bone would slowly get destroyed until they were all gone, and the flying skull comes down. This gas will mimic the past attacks of one element of the fight, so it'll all form into the skull and fly above the player, rapidly firing, and then become like a huge ring, and then swing a bunch of flames and stuff like the bones. But unlike the past fights, though, its health goes down. The gas would shrink, releasing more souls out of the world until it's poofed into nothingness, and finally killed. But the souls are thankful this time. So the boss would drop singed bones as well as awakened heart, which could be used to craft stuff. But for the meantime, the mechanical bone glove, which would obviously been gotten by Skeletron Prime, these would summon way bigger crossbones, which could home into enemies and hit multiple times, right? But the Terra Blade would get competition, because just combining simple frag grenade with Souls of Might would create the false holy hand grenade, able to destroy tiles and enemies alike. It's basically just equivalent to the old one that used to exist, and I think it was 3DS's, right? This would clear ungodly amounts of space out and deal a ton of damage. Or you could vote third party with the false impetus, swapping out the might with fright to gain much more damaging tile undestructive weapon. While the HHG is better as a tool, the impetus would be able to be thrown much easier, and it would explode on contact with enemies, wiping them out completely. But finally, back on the subject of those singed fossils and the awakened heart, the tools that would utilize them. First, the Spongiform throwing spear, and just one of the new universal upgrades given to all throwing spears would be their drastically enhanced knockback and kebab abilities. The spear would stick to enemies, and depending on what type of spear, could hit enemies as well, and it would hit a limit and fall off and distract them and stuff. But the Spongiform in itself would also drastically weaken enemies kebabbed into it. The Awakened Heart could be used for the new armor set, the Awakened Fossil set. Instead of being possessed by the spirits, this would utilize technology to exploit the energy that these spirits left behind. So you get max bonuses possible from the previous iteration permanently, plus 3 times the original stats when really close to dying. Following the defeat of Planet Terror, a lot of people consider this to be the final third of the game. I don't agree with these people. I just rush through all these upcoming bosses. I never care about the Duke or the Moons or Emperors. I just go immediately for the Golem and then Lunatic holds us. But let's imagine that we don't do that. All right. Still, okay, the Plantera's Jaw, it's a gauntlet acquired from something, I don't know what, I don't know, just take a guess, When firing, there's a chance to, basically, you'll shoot out, like, one of those Plantera's, like, big grappling things, they'll splurge out and grab the enemies before spitting them back out, but if you wanted to vote third party, right, you could instead invest in the Sharknado launcher, which would be a potion gun which could either spout, a singular shark or entire Sharknados, along with potions such as the Plasma Wasp potion, So before, a new honeydew herb would spawn, but, after Plantera's defeated, all plants would now mature, growing the melons, which could now form the Plasma Wasp potion again, basically. A direct upgrade. This would spawn 2 Plasma Wasps, which would fly around enemies and blah, blah, blah. Basically, they're just stronger bees. Deep into the dungeon, new enemies and, as such, new weapons follow. The stage inside would now begin glowing a ghostly tinge, and it could be used to create the Necrosis, able to create multiple of the Necromancer's beams in one direction, instead creating a huge flurry of projectiles. What's more, the Diabolists could also drop their secret weapon, the Hellfire Grenade, which should similarly create, never-ending spew of fire and hate from each of its edges, Or by combining regular throwing knives and ectoplasm, you could create the blood-soaked knives. These are able to steal the life of other enemies and give it to you, which sounds great, but unfortunately, you'll also have to give it some of your life. For every one knife missed, you'll be damaged by 1. And once again, you throw these knives super fast. This could build up extremely quickly and lead to a lot of deaths if you aren't careful. But if you remain steady, you could also very easily gain a ton of health. But the risk is definitely still there. Next up, the Empress of Light, which could drop the Light Show, a type of throwing knife which is set on at light speeds and skewers enemies. Also, each one comes out as like a different color of the rainbow, so it's like, it's sort of like red, orange, yellow. So, you can make like a bunch of rainbows for free if you just throw them like pew, 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 pew. Though, after venturing through the jungle, you'll gain access to a hidden temple in the middle of the grove, which has ancient technology of cold-blooded origin. And you'll find an ancient type of moss creating its own organ. And much like everything else in the temple, it's imbued with an ancient solar energy, energy that can be harvested to create the sunspot potion, little balls of what seems to be plasma without the heat or energy required. And these would explode like an odd circle and linger before presumably burning out. Also, the traps inside can be harvested with the golem balls being used separately, acting just as they do in the tempo. They bounce around everywhere and they release spikes. Though, actually defeating the boss will leave you with the Ancient Contraption, which is an odd model for an old project the lizards would never complete. Essentially, it's golem mech suit, utilizing its signature power cells to gain stats and using the golem's mechanics of hidden spears, launchable fists, and laser balls. And maybe it could get powerful like the closer you are to the surface. That'd be cool. Although, if you can make it out of the dungeon to use the strange materials inside, you can get your hands on the pinhead, which would hopefully give this stupid fucking enemy a point, so he's not just slow and fucking extremely difficult and stupid, and he just doesn't even fucking give you anything at all. But basically, even after being decapitated, the pinhead would fire out projectiles in every which way. Only difference is now you can control what he fires. Or, if you're up to the challenge of defeating Mothra, you could receive the Impto Hero Capsule, which is it's a ruined projectile, which seems to serve no purpose until being combined with the False Impus and Holy Hand Grenade, of which you could finally wield the power of these infinite weapons, with each being huge upgrades to their former selves, but it's being the same core idea, One of them doing, like a ton of space damage and, less actual damage, and then one of them doing more damage, but, doesn't destroy tiles. The Terrarian world is shifting immensely. Near the dungeon, an oblivious cult hopes to use the power of Cthulhu. Misguided as they might be, interrupting their ceremony will only result in a ton of pushback. But even after they're defeated, their wish will still be granted, and many celestial pillars will come and mutate the ground and skies, bringing unprecedented villagers from beyond. Throwing is pretty much just a mix between, ranger and warrior, so, you get the technological side of the vortex pillar and the hot side of the solar pillar. And boom, you put them together, you get the sunspot pillar. So basically, as a horrific display of power, the cult created this artificial pillar to appeal to Cthulhu's strange sentiments, experimenting on the regular creatures of Terraria to further their goals. It uses the slime's regenerative and gelatinous properties to turn them into sunspot slimes, which would gain energy from the sun, using it to slowly grow in size and power. And what's worse is when they're defeated, they'll only split apart to create other versions of themselves. But the naturally curious zombies were born to become the foot soldiers of the battle. The cult asked themselves, if one golem was able to protect all these lizards from harm, what about a whole horde of them to stop those who abuse them? Well, manufacturing a hard labor force which can sustain their goals. What's more is that of the rabbit's energy, which is exploited as they scour the land, looking for targets, bloodthirsty to decimate their surroundings. These rabbits will endlessly run down anything that moves to kamikaze on them and hopefully destroy both. The demon eyes got the best end of the deal, becoming basically the eyes in the skies. They search for enemies, and once they find those enemies, they power up their brethren and alert them of your presence. Yet they rarely attack with their laser eyes. The actual muscle in the sky is that of the cave bats, which form a sort of force field, able to pick up objects and dust around them and chuck them back at you, just floating just above and taunting. Although battling this army would be hard, eventually getting its force field down and destroying the sunspot pillar itself will give you its fragments, and as such, the celestial weapons capable of amazing feats. Including the brown dwarf, which completely replaces thrown projectiles with small mini-suns that home towards enemies and burn them terribly. Though these would retain the effects of whatever they were previously. The other attainable weapon is the fourth, which would split the potion gun meta into 4 by shooting 4 streams, which would also transform themselves into liquid, gas, solids, and of course, the fourth one, plasma. But there's no more time for conjecture. After achieving these goals, instead there's only one solution, only one more thing that must be done. Potentially the hardest, most arduous journey anyone has ever come across. Past the secrets of the Moon Lord, they're all done. All of your trials are over. The sky has stopped raining material and the land seems peaceful. Although evil still infects the world, its majority has been erased. And now with these even more powerful prizes can be won. The plasma deflector is a fully functioning manipulator of matter capable of deflecting plasma, fully controlling the atoms around it, throwing all atoms as impossibly hot spheres of fire which zoom into enemies, dealing tons of damage. Its potion gun opposite, the quantum entangler, would instead be able to fully bypass range and spawn material into enemies with slight knock to damage in exchange for, literally never being able to miss a shot ever again. However, Moonlord's loot isn't limited to just his direct drops, but also the luminite that makes up his blood, which is able to be crafted into other inventions integral to the creation of the luminite spear, a living fork with a death wish, able to fly around and independently skewer multiple enemies together. This luminite could also be manipulated to instead combine 2 objects into their true selves. The true impulse and holy hand grenades could come together to each scar the land with their immense power and damage put together, with the Terranades block destruction able to be switched on and off with just the press of a button, yet it's still able to strike fear in the hearts of everybody who sees it. And finally, the sunspot armor. Also being absurdly powerful, the helmet is able to change its function. The tank armor will tell you you're a tank, giving you a whopping 5 health bars and doubling damage, at the cost of you being a little bitch boy that can't walk, like you're stuck in place, you know what I mean? Or you could go with the more practical set, the assassin set, which would grant you untamed abilities. All attacks are not homing, small spikes flow out along with you, with weaker versions of whatever potion or throwable that you're using. So yeah, this one's post Moon Lord. It doesn't really matter. I don't care if it's overpowered. Fuck you. And there it is. There's fucking done. Okay. So I'm guessing most of the people watching this don't know, but I made this video about a year and a half ago. I made it a long fucking time ago. I'll just say, okay, 65 views is way too many views for this garbage ass video. Seriously, this video fucking sucks. Okay, please do not fucking watch this goddamn video. I just knew. I was looking at it and I was like, this could be something really, really special. So, I just decided to make it into something hopefully miles better than just this piece of shit. But, so if you have any suggestions of what else I missed out or could have added, it'd be great to see in the comments. I'm not trying to just bait more comments. Also, if you're wondering, I don't want to really get too super specific on certain things just because, frankly, I don't really want to sit here. I mean, I already worked on this video a lot. I don't want to sit here and try to balance all these weapons, think about what's the exact right amount of damage that they should deal for how much they can deal per second. And then also, there's a couple things that came a little bit too late into the creation of the video. So first of all, I don't remember who said it. Somebody said something about how the ninja should be able to move in after you kill the king slime. I was like, that is such a fucking cool idea. But frankly, I saw this as I was creating, like animating the Moonlord section, and frankly, I don't want to have to go through this whole thing because that creates so many options. Like, there's so many things that like a new movable person would do. So that's something that could be expanded. And accessories was something I just nearly cut out also, just because, like I said, I also thought about that. I thought about that a little bit earlier. I thought about that in the like golem portion of the video, and at the time, because I just saw the image of like a slime dropping basically what amounts to like slime kidney stones, and I thought that was like a cool idea because maybe turn shit like slimy or whatever, but couldn't really think of anything else. And also, like I said, to really, I guess a lot of classes don't really have many accessories. I would probably really only need to make like 2 or 3. But that just didn't feel right. Like, I feel like I would have to make a bunch of accessories. You know what I mean? I feel like I couldn't just add 2 or 3 accessories in. I'd be like, yeah, that's all the accessories. But like I said, I also just didn't want to have to go that much deeper into the accessories. And also, I just couldn't really think of anything else. I couldn't really think of any cool thing that you could like add. I couldn't really think of anything else except for that like slime kidney stone, which I thought was like a funny idea. It's like same thing with the kidneys, like all like the sediment collects at the bottom, becomes like these hard stones. Like, imagine like all the random dust that like slimes pick up as they go across the fucking land, that they turn into like what would amount to kidney stones. But like I said, I just couldn't really expand it. But I don't know, if you guys have any ideas, it's be pretty cool. I think I'm done with my fucking mini podcast. Thank you, honestly, if you're even at this section. I realized just how fucking nerdy this video sounds. But